This is an interview that I am so glad I get to do. I wish I didn't have to do it, to be honest. I wish the circumstances of the last 7 weeks hadn't been such that this was a conversation that needed to be had, but it is a conversation that really needs to be had. And I hope you'll stay with us because we're going to talk an awful lot here about free speech in the UK, about the apparatus of the state that can try to shut that down. And we're going to talk about an amazing woman, Bernadette Spofforth, who I am lucky enough to consider a friend, so much so a friend. I think it's fair to say, Bernie, and tell me if I'm wrong, that I've sort of lived not every second, by no means, but I've lived a lot of this last few weeks with you because we met in 2020 because we were both very vocal voices questioning lockdowns and questioning vaccine mandates. And like many people during that period of time, we found each other because we were united with a sense that something had gone horribly wrong. And we've got a lot to get through here, but I think we don't agree on everything, you and I, and that's what's so interesting. There are some political points that we have quite different opinions on. But in terms of what is right and what is wrong, I think you and I share a very strong sense of justice. As we sit here now in autumn of 2024, how has your sense of justice been changed before we go into the detail of what happened to you?
My sense of justice hasn't changed really because I always knew that the justice system in the UK was a complete and utter shambles, an absolute shambles. And to me, it seems like just as with COVID, where the NHS was completely able to run out vaccinations all over the country at 1,000,000 miles an hour, it could perform at that level. It seems to me that the justice system in the UK could perform at that level when they were asked to do so during the riots of 7 weeks ago now. And I think that's very unfair on the public in this country. It's very unfair that convictions for rapists are so appalling, that convictions for robberies are so appalling, and that people don't feel that they're living in a safe society anymore, and they don't feel they can rely on their police. And if you have a look at what's just happened to me, how could I ever trust anything again? How could I?
So before we talk about what you've been through in the last few weeks, I want people to understand who you were before all of this. You've been on the front pages of papers in the last few weeks. You've been all over the press. You've been the subject of a Channel 4 news item. And before all this, who were you before this kicked off?
So before all this, I've been what I've been since I was a teenager. Working. I'm a very hard-working person, and I've done a huge amount of my business life. I started businesses very young. I started a business when I was 21. I floated a business on NASDAQ when I was 27. I've started businesses, sold businesses. I've run other people's companies for them. I've been employed by other businesses. I've had 3 children. And I have always tried to do my absolute best. And my passion is small businesses and businesses that try, they just try and make a mark for themselves in the world. And sometimes they can't, they don't have the skills, or they don't know how to grow their businesses. And one of the reasons I got active during the COVID period on X was because people like the CBI and other business advice companies were charging for their advice. They were literally charging £1,000 a letter. And I just said, I'll do it free. Anybody who needs help at all, I will do it free. And I didn't do that because I'm any kind of saintly person. I did it because I'm passionate about businesses being able to survive. And that was my background. That was what I did.
And so you never wanted to be famous. You never wanted to be any sort of professional agitator. I mean, the number of times I've asked you to come on the telly in the last 4 years and be on GB News, and you said, no, Bev, I don't want to be on telly. I'm not interested in being famous. That's not what I do it for. You're just driven by this really strong sense of what is right and what is wrong. And you've, for some reason, been incredibly perceptive about the geopolitical situation across the world. So even though you're not a household name, to social media users, you've been a sort of talismanic figure of the last 4 years. It is no exaggeration, Bernie, to say that when a big news issue happened, the kind of stuff that wasn't making it into the mainstream media, you would be the person that a lot of us would go and say, well, what does Bernie say about this? Why? Because of your diligence. Because you never ever posted anything that you didn't think was true. And this is what's going to be so interesting when we come on to talk about subsequently what's happened to you. You would go to the primary source. If I wanted something clarified about the Agenda 2030 document, who would I message? Who would go to the primary source? You. So just talk about that girly swat inside you that has always driven the content that you've produced.
I am really a girly swat, right? I am a girly swat. And I love research and I love background information because it helps you make better decisions. Yeah, I'm a businesswoman. So I would always look for primary sources at government level. So I spend a lot of time on government websites, going through documents, going through meetings they've had. The same for the EU, the same for the UN, the same for the WHO. And that is where you can begin to piece together perhaps what is driving some governments. And for me, I didn't particularly tell anyone if I had voted to leave or if I'd voted to remain. But what I did was I was able to give a balanced argument about both sides of that argument. Because I didn't think what I was going to do personally was of anybody else's business. But I felt that there wasn't enough information being given to people. And so I gave the information, much to the annoyance of people who wanted to remain, and also sometimes the annoyance of people who wanted to stay. I quite like to be balanced, and you can only get that balance if you've actually discovered the background to the story that you're going to talk about, which is ironic, really, given what's happened.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of cruel irony of your story and what happened in relation to the Southport stabbings and how you were blamed for the riots. And I'm still not going to come on to that yet, because I still think we need to dig down a little bit more into who you were before that day and that night and that day that you got the knock on the door from the police officers. Just give us an idea of some of the issues that you have identified and shone a light on over the last 4 years. So it was lockdowns originally, as you say, predominantly driven by wanting to help businesses and to help people and to help families and to help schools stay open because that was good for children and all of that stuff. You've also been incredibly diligent in terms of the net zero drive, the push across the world. And you are a wordsmith, so you have an ability to sum up in what was originally 140 characters, now it's more. But for some reason, your tweets would nail the essence of an issue. Particularly, I'd say recently you've been hot on solar panels and solar farms. Just tell us the kind of things you would tweet about that.
So first of all, I absolutely refuse to call anything that doesn't produce food a farm. So they are factories. What we're talking about is turning millions of hectares of arable land into factories. And regardless of the argument over whether or not you can graze a sheep under a solar panel, it is taking farming land away. And by the way, people don't graze sheep under solar panels because they have them surrounded by link chains so that no one can get in, right? That isn't happening on any kind of grand scale. And for me, the problem with wind farms and the problem with, I've called them farms, haven't I? Wind factories and solar factories is that the infrastructure isn't there to take advantage of them, one. Two, they don't work terribly well. And three, the amount of energy required to produce them in China and bring them over means that we're not net zero, we're just off-sourcing our carbon usage. Now, whether or not you agree or believe that CO2 is causing the climate to change, right? I don't care what you believe about that. But what you have to believe is that offshoring your usage is a lie. it's a lie. So Canada, for example, its largest coal importer, so the person it sells the most coal to, is China. China then manufactures all its solar panels and ships them back to Canada. What?
So you've taken this as one of the issues, solar panels particularly, and you scour the internet for facts about this, and then you post the fact in a pithy way which shines a light on hypocrisy. You were one of the first people, I think, to identify the World Economic Forum's vision for the world and to piece together the kind of things that were being talked about in Davos and to show us how they're being implemented in the real world in a way that the mainstream media have not been doing. And that, I think, has made you an incredibly powerful voice to just waking people up.
So... And it is quite a tricky thing to piece together, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate this as well as perhaps I could write this, and maybe it would be better to write it. But certainly the UN has become this behemoth thing, massively beholden to very wealthy philanthropists who have a vision for how the world should look. All of those philanthropists have something in common. They're businessmen, and they've been at the head of very, very large businesses. And if you take a step back and you have a look at what's happening, you can kind of see that what they think is if we ran the whole world as one great big business, it would all make more sense. And, you know, the UN, WHO, have just become departments of a one world type government. Now, that is not a conspiracy theory. It's actually on all of their websites. It's there. And you can see that this big equality of opportunity, they have turned into equality of outcome for everybody else, but they, of course, will still remain phenomenally rich. And if you look at people like the WHO, they get 70% of their funding from private sources. And the WHO, its former chief exec, has already said that means those people pull the strings. So if you're a business person and you're donating to the WHO, there's a reason why.
Yeah,
it's because it's
exactly.
richer.
And so the reason I wanted you to explain all that is that I want people to see who you are and that you are political, but you don't see yourself as aligned with any political party. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
I don't see yourself in those terms.
No, I don't see myself in those terms because I'm a voter. So I'm not loyal to a party. What I am is, show me your manifesto. Explain to me how you're going to get there. How are you going to spend my tax money, and how much are you going to leave me alone? Right, that's kind of been the makeup of how I make decisions on how to vote. So I'm not terribly political in terms of being aligned to a party, but I am very political because you know, and it struck me in Brexit actually. Many governments all across the world, everyone's talking about how governments they just look so weak and there doesn't seem to be any talent there. And I can tell you why easily. We outsourced all our talent and they all went to work for these great big huge organizations like the UN, where you don't pay any tax, by the way. And that's where the talent has gone. And so you look at our government, regardless of who's in power, they either have already delegated power under an international agreement or they are going to, because they don't want to be unpopular, although Keir Starmer seems to be enjoying it. But it's because they can't make the decision. They want someone else to make the decision for them. And maybe there would be a party I would support if we had a leader that was actually leading, but we don't.
So against that backdrop of always being diligent, of having strong opinions on right and wrong, on having a phenomenal perspective of geopolitics and social and cultural change across the world, we find ourselves one summer's day with these little girls who go to a Taylor Swift dance class in Southport. as our daughters, you and I, would have done on a summer holiday just to keep them busy for the day, and you take them there. And they never come home because they go in there and then somebody arrives at the door and he takes a knife and he kills 3 children and injures more. What was your thought process of what happened next? Because it was the tweet that you then posted, it was the X post then, that caused the domino effect, which leads us to this interview today.
So, and this is not very clear in my brain. It is no longer very clear, and it's been a massively traumatic time. Obviously, not as traumatic as the parents in Southport and their families. But what had happened, how my brain tends to work is, a piece of information comes in, and then kind of lots of other bits of information I have in my head are planted around it. And funnily enough, on that day, it was, hold on, we've just had a soldier. Didn't this just happen to a soldier a week ago? Didn't we just have a little girl who had her throat slit? Didn't we just have 3 people that died in a park last year? Are they going to say it's mental health? That was what I thought, along with all the other thoughts that you have about how horrendous everything was. And I was watching it on the television, and I simply scrolled the word Southport. And I saw an image from a LinkedIn post, I think, and I clicked that. And then I scrolled, saw what you then read. I copied and pasted it and dumped it in a post and said, if this is true, there will be hell to pay. Now, I mean on all levels, for the government, because you are not keeping people safe. To me, it was incredibly clear what I've done. I hadn't thought it.
Yeah, and I saw that same post as you. I think it was a LinkedIn, and it was a dad saying his children had been at this event, and so that gave it a veracity. And he had reposted an Islamic name, a Muslim name, suggesting it could have been an Islamic fundamentalist who'd committed the atrocity. This post also said that this person was known to mental health services. We don't know to this day whether that's true. We said that he was on a government watch list, an MI5 watch list. To this day, we don't know whether that is true or not. But it also said that he came across on a boat. We know categorically that was not true. Yeah. You'd also seen this name and those facts, correct me if I'm wrong, on an American website that looks like... Oh, you hadn't seen it at that point?
No. That was all I did. If this is true, there will be hell to pay. And I then put the phone down.
Yes.
If I'd held the phone for 5 minutes longer, I probably would have deleted the post. But I actually went outside. And I didn't come back for, I don't know, 1-2 hours. I'm not sure the length of time. I picked up my phone and I just saw that it wasn't true or another announcement had been made. And I just deleted the post. I didn't even read any comments. I deleted the post. That was completely wrong. I'll rethink about this later when I've done some more research. Yeah. That was how it worked.
And then subsequently, and also I think it's worth saying that you were one of 5,000 people at least that retweeted that name, that erroneous name that was made up. We'll come on to who might have made it up in a minute, but you were one of 5,000 people who tweeted that information. And subsequently, there are riots then in the Northwest. And I was on the telly the next day, and it was so obvious that these riots were nothing to do with misinformation that might have been put out on a few tweets. This was about a dissatisfied British public, angry at, I would say, angry at feeling poor, whilst feeling that illegal immigrants get dentistry, housing, complex social issues like that. It's a sense of injustice on those people. Some of them were thugs and idiots and racists. There's no doubt about it. Setting fire to a migrant hotel with children in it, disgusting, appalling. But it was a tinderbox of all sorts of specific political dissatisfaction, which I think to blame on something somebody's read on the internet takes away from the personal responsibility of those people. And I particularly remember being on air and seeing Jess Phillips, the Labour MP, blaming the gangs of Muslim men that were in Birmingham around the roundabout that beat up a guy in the pub car park. You might remember that. And her saying, but, you know, all day they were whipped up by social media saying that the far right were going to be there. And that's why they did that. And I would say, no, as a politician, you need to come out and you need to say, I don't care what you read on the internet. Do not go out of your house and rabbit round a roundabout in a Ford Fiesta with a Palestinian flag looking for trouble. What are you doing? But nobody was saying that, Bernie. The reaction was so interesting to those riots. And you got scapegoated. You massively got scapegoated. So what was the first thing you knew that you were somehow being blamed for this?
I think later on in that evening, there were quite a few people saying I'd posted it, I'd started it. And I just couldn't. I just thought, this will calm down. That's ridiculous. Of course I didn't start it. And by the morning, it had become louder noise. And then there was a big thread put out that stated that I had made up the name, or the first time that name and that sentence had ever appeared was from me. Now,
that's right.
I knew fundamentally that was untrue. It was untrue because I had copied and pasted it from X. And I don't use other social media, so I wouldn't have sourced it anywhere else. I knew I'd got it from X. And that really was then quite alarming because that number 6 in the thread was picked up by thousands and thousands of very angry people, all them blaming me for doing something that I knew I had not done.
And so what did you do then? You then got some data sleuths to really deep dive into this, didn't you?
Yeah, and they were very kind to me. And I want to say, first of all, that what that misinformation expert did was he was trying to make a link between Islamophobia and people calling out what had happened in Southport and trying to say that had been my position. And that's very hard to deal with because A, it isn't my position. B, I have been a migrant. I emigrated to South Africa. And, you know, if I was one of those people living in those countries, I would want to emigrate and migrate as well. The problem is not with the people. Mostly, the problem is with the government. And these data experts were very kind, but it became obvious quite early on that I had picked it up very soon. They absolutely believed I'd taken it from X after cross-questioning me and asking, could you possibly have got it from anywhere else? I was like, no, I definitely didn't. I know, I definitely didn't.
And so you tried to, so having found where it had originally come, that you weren't the first person to make this up, because that would be ludicrous. Why would you sit down, come up with some Middle Eastern name and just, why would you do that? You're not mad. You just wouldn't do that. And so the idea that this was your fault, you'd sat there and gone, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to cause a riot in Southport as a housewife and a businesswoman living in Chester. I can't wait. It was just mad. It's a ludicrousy. And then I think you rang me and we thought this was going to go in. You rang me in the afternoon and you said, Bev, Channel 4 News are going to do a thing about me tonight causing the riots. And we were both like, this is ridiculous. And so we had a phone call with a lawyer that we know and another friend who works in the media, didn't we, to brainstorm it. At that point, we think what we're dealing with is just to clear your name and actually to let people know the truth of what had happened and maybe perhaps to find the person who originally came up with this misinformation. And so we watched Channel 4 News. I spoke to you. You were deeply distressed that night. Understandably, they'd shown your face. They said where you lived, not the address, but they said the area. they had given all sorts of personal information about who you were. And at that point, everything starts to slightly unravel, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did start to unravel. But over the course of the next couple of days, both of those data experts, one in Australia and one in the UK, we understood, I certainly began to understand quite a lot of how things work. So, for example, timestamps on screenshots on X are never used in evidence because servers do things called caching, and they can cache at different times, which means a photograph taken that shows, I don't know, 1:15 in the afternoon might actually have been 1:17 or 1:16 or 1:13. It was just when you took that photograph. So, number one, although it looked like mine had the earliest timestamp, we couldn't prove that. We also can't get timestamp data on all deleted posts. So don't forget, I went out in the garden for 2 hours. So I have no idea, and I would have deleted it after 5 or 6 or 10 minutes whenever I found that probably wasn't the right thing to post. So I was probably late to deleting, but thousands and thousands of tweets were deleted, and there are no timestamps on them. So who knows? We then found that a couple of people had uploaded full blogs with images on to servers out of Florida. And even if you have an AI system to generate your article, you still need to put some stuff in to start with. And one of those blogs that was uploaded was only 60 seconds after my post. So it wouldn't be realistic that they would have come onto X, scrolled, seen my post, loaded it into an AI software, got it written, embedded photographs, and then posted it on a server 60 seconds after mine. It's not possible.
Yeah.
The name was awash all over Telegram. And then we found a Facebook post from a blogger, and his timestamp said 11:26. Now, that is, as news was breaking in Southport, there weren't even any details. So the timestamp was incorrect. Well, if his timestamp was incorrect, why are you saying mine is correct? Right? So it was all a big, massive mess. What we did...
But I'm just going to say, but what you're doing at that point, Bernie, is you're going, OK, well, if I find the evidence to prove that I wasn't the first person, then all this will go away. I can give that evidence to the media and then they will understand. Yeah. So you spoke to the Daily Mail and you spoke to the Times and you thought, well, once they see that I wasn't the originator of this post, I can't be accused of deliberately posting misinformation to cause harm. But that's not what happened when you spoke to these publications. Your name, you found the evidence that you weren't the first person to do it. You spoke to a couple of newspapers that it did the opposite really. It didn't really clear your name. It just kept the story going, unfortunately. And then when you and I think this is not nice, but it's just a PR scandal and it's just something and nothing really, and it will blow over, you then get a knock at the door from the police. So just tell us what happened, Bernie. And I know it's upsetting and I know it's really hard.
I provided a lot of my own evidence to the press and they weren't interested, except one. And she was very kind to me. And that was Marianna Spring, which I know that comes as a shock to a lot of people. But she was very kind to me. She believed me. And she'd also done similar work.
And that's the BBC Verified reporter, just for people who don't know. Marianna Spring works for the BBC Verified department. I don't have a lot of time for them normally, but anyway, I'll let that go.
Well, me either. And she was great because she'd already done the same work I had. She'd already found the server post. She already knew that it was everywhere. And so that was great. I knew it was completely out of control by this point. And I thought it might be possible for the police to want to have, an interview with me, which would have been great because I could have laid out all the information for them and actually given them the direction of perhaps where they could look if they really wanted to. And I was very, very upset by everything that was happening, because those newspapers had almost gleefully brought me down. Right? They don't know me. They don't know anything about me, but they had gleefully destroyed 30 years worth of reputation in 12 hours. And they would not stop. And even though I provided the information, they were like, yeah, we're all right now. We're done now, love. Don't worry. I was like, but I'm not done.
Yeah.
And the police turned up on that morning. Just one guy said he was going to do a welfare check on Bonnie Spofforth, bit of misinformation there. And the Met Police had a phone call worried about me. And they had, the name they had for me was Bonnie. So we kind of chatted to him for 10 minutes and went away. And then a couple of hours later, the doorbell rang, and it was 5 police people, 5 of them. And I knew that they were coming to arrest me. And I took off my jewelry because, like, I've watched some prison shows, and that's what you do when the police turn up. And it's really important that people understand that it doesn't matter how brave you are. It doesn't matter how you think you will deal with something. Until you're put in that situation, you've got no idea. And I just mentally completely collapsed. Nothing worked. I could barely speak. I was freezing cold. I couldn't even see straight. And one of the policewomen took me upstairs to search me. And my memory of this time was her pointing out she liked my wallpaper. I'm like, hold on, you've come to arrest me and you want to discuss my wallpaper? And it was awful. They let me get a jumper, which I did, and they let me get a book. And to my shame, the biggest book on my bookcase is a Bible. And I didn't take it in case I thought they would think that made me far right. But that's how my brain was working. Anyway, they tried to put me in the prison van, and actually my husband just said, not a chance, not a chance. And then they do that thing where they push on your head and they put you in the car. And half of my brain is thinking, wow, this is fascinating. I really need to remember this for all the points, because it's just the most unbelievable experience. I must always remember this. And the other part of my brain is just slush, just complete slush. And we drove through the summer sunshine to the police station. And it was horrendous. And you know, the police in the car, they were talking about how much they disliked their new female boss and paid me no attention at all. My life had come to what I believed was an end. And they wanted to talk about their shift patterns. I mean, I get it. They're just doing their job. But it was so enormous to me, and it was so ordinary to them, that it is fascinating to kind of look back and remember it. And we got to the police station, and they held me for quite a long time in a concrete receiving area, I think. And then they took me through to the big middle area. And the policeman said, well, you have to fill out lots of, well, he reads a lot of stuff to you and you just sign it, which I did. And they wanted my hairband, and they didn't want to let me have my book, but in the end they did. And then he said, it's very noisy in here today, so what we're going to do is put you in a quiet cell. And my ears woke up, and all I could hear was banging, screaming, shouting. I just thought, oh my God, I'm actually going into a cell. And they put me in the cell, and it was a cold concrete cell with a metal toilet on one side and a concrete kind of plinth with one of those very thin gym mattresses, you know, those blue ones when you were at school, on it, and a cover that was like a tablecloth, like a damask shiny tablecloth. And they said they'd be back to fingerprint me and take my photo, which they they did come back to do. And then they left me there. And they checked on me every half an hour by opening the door or pulling the latch down and making me sit up and look at them. And which was staggering, because once I realized there were cameras in the room, I decided to lie down and put the cover on my head, because at least they couldn't see me. And so then I had to sit up, take it off my head and tell them, yes, I'm here, I'm okay, and then lie down again. It was every half an hour, 4 hours. Now, a normal person would have asked what the time was every time they came, but the mush side of my brain asked the time once and then counted. And I remember thinking, how have people been able to write their names in the wall? Because I don't have anything sharp. And if I had something, I could write what the time is, and then I'd know what the time was. I mean, I was in a state of probably complete and utter shock. I think that's probably what it was.
And how long did they keep you in there for, Bernie, like that?
Well, apart from taking me out to do the fingerprinting and the photograph, and to check if I'd robbed a bank by checking if there was any of that light on me, and taking the footprints from my Oak boots, like you do, and DNA. And I didn't think they could take DNA until you'd been charged, but apparently they can. So then at about 2:30 in the morning, which I found out it was 2:30 because when I came out of the cell, there was a clock on the wall. They took me out to see my lawyer. And I met my lawyer. I turned down duty lawyer and just hoped to God that you lot would talk to each other and find me somebody, which you did. Thank you. And he was superb. And that was over quite quickly. But then I was told that I had the interview with the police, and then I was told, right, well, this will go to the CPS at 7 o'clock. You'll be in magistrates at 10 o'clock. It must have been 4 o'clock in the morning by this stage. So I thought in 3 hours, they'll get me ready and I'll go to court. And I had nothing with me, nothing. Hadn't cleaned my teeth, washed my face. I've got daily contact lenses in. They'd been in for 2 days. I couldn't see properly. And I just thought, are you supposed to go to court looking like this? Or are you supposed to have clothes? How does this work? And I think that was the very worst time it could ever have got, was when they took me out again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought it was 7 o'clock in the morning. You have no appreciation of any sense of timing. And they took me out of the cell and they said, we're still downloading information, so we're going to keep you here for another 12 hours. And that was the lowest point it could possibly have got for me, because I thought that I'd be going to magistrates and then they'd remand me. But no, they've put that off for another 12 hours, so I still have to wait here. And my hips were so sore, I could hardly lie down. And they said, can we get you anything? And I said, my hips hurt. So then they got me a mattress. I'd been there for 24 hours. And only then did they get me a mattress. Which was
it's just worth remembering at this point, this is all because of a number of words that you put on the internet. That is it. That is what it's worth remembering at this point. You copied and pasted some words. You added some words of your own with a political comment. 2 hours later, you deleted those words. And that is what led you into that situation, subsequently spending 36 hours in a jail cell with your family and your friends distraught. I couldn't stop crying that weekend. I just couldn't stop crying. I just couldn't believe what had happened, because there, but for the grace of God, go anybody that is a dissenting voice, is what I could just, my heart was breaking for you. And you were, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie, but were you arrested for incitement to racial hatred, basically because you questioned government policy on illegal migration, effectively, because that was part of the copy?
No.
It wasn't
No.
that.
No,
Okay.
and I hadn't questioned the government on illegal migration. I'd said, if this is true, there will be hell to pay, right? Because it's following on from so many attacks. Seriously, if this is true, there'll be hell to pay. What they arrested me for was on suspicion that I had incited racial hatred, and so there were 2 potential charges, and the other one was that I had made up a malicious communication. I can't remember the exact wording, but I had made it up in order to incite violence.
I think it's violence of more than trivial harm or something, wasn't it? I seem to remember.
Something, yeah.
And so they said you get released.
At 4 o'clock, at about 3:45 in the morning, they took me out of the cell again and said I needed to see the nurse. And I said, I don't want to see the nurse. Now, I had turned down all food for the entire time. I couldn't eat anything. And I didn't want to see the nurse, but they told me I couldn't go unless I'd seen the nurse. So I sat down with the nurse, and then she said, fine, you can go. And I didn't know where I was going. So I said, are we going to a different prison now? Are we going to the magistrate court for 7 o'clock in the morning? And nobody answered me. So I thought, well, maybe they just transfer prisoners at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know. I've never done it before. And then they took me to the desk, and there was a different policewoman there. And she said, we can't hold you any longer. Not that they didn't want to, but that they couldn't hold me any longer. And just thank goodness for my lawyer, because he told them, don't release her after 36 hours just on the street, because that's what they do. They just open the door and off you go. Well, I had no cards, no handbag, no device. I don't know the number of a taxi company. How do I get home? So anyway, they took me home and dropped me off at 4 o'clock in the morning.
And presumably you went to sleep and you woke up and it was all a dream, because surely that can't have just happened to you.
Actually, and I am a really strong person. You know, I've been in business for a long time, but I want people to know I came through the door at 4 o'clock in the morning and collapsed completely. And I couldn't go to bed because I was terrified. I thought they'd come back. And I didn't know if it meant you had to go to magistrates anyway. How would I know? So I just lay. I just lay on the couch. Sorry, Beth.
No, I was just going to say, you've got your daughter at home, and your son at home at the time.
Yes, my son and my daughter and my husband, and literally they just wrapped me in a duvet, sat me on the couch, and nobody left my side for about 48 hours. And I could not even drink a cup of tea. I could do nothing. And it wasn't, lots of people have said this to me subsequently. The process is the punishment. Nobody can punish her more than this first time. But for me, I guess exactly like for him as well, my entire life had crumbled, everything. And so you have to piece that together with the experience, the fear of going to prison for 3 years when you know you have not done it, and the loss of your entire career, and the respect of your colleagues, the respect of your friends and your family, gone. I had emails from colleagues that I've worked with and that have known me for 20 years saying, remove my contact details and never contact me again. They didn't even want to hear my side of the story. And I know there's a lot of people that have no sympathy for me, and I completely get that. You are absolutely allowed to have a different opinion to me. And that's the problem, isn't it, Bev? That's the problem. You can't have a different opinion anymore. Otherwise, you are in danger of finding yourself in the position I was in. Because if it hadn't have been for those people bombarding the Met Police and the newspapers with my name and what they believed I had done, I don't think I would have been arrested, no.
That's interesting. So you think it was partly a pile-on behind the scenes? There were certainly lots of ex-posts which were copying in at Met Police and copying in the police, trying to show them your tweet. Look what she's done. Look what the anti-vaxxer says. Look what the anti-establishment voice says. And do you think that played a role in them knocking on your door?
Yeah, I think it played a very big role because, you see, the profile that had been built up on me was that I was this anti-vaxxing, right-winging, troublemaking racist, right? And that is not me. And anybody who's followed me for 4 years and anyone who knows me knows that is not me. But they didn't care. So if the police thought we could have a linchpin here, we could have found one of the organisers of, riots, then I can see absolutely why they would have wanted my devices and to interview me. I have no problem with that. I really don't. And actually, I have no problem with the police. They were very kind to me. The problem, what I think happened is that a big pile-on is like a great big bunch of bullies, isn't it? And I lump the media into that. A great big bunch of bullies. If you dehumanize the person you are bullying, then you don't feel guilty, do you? Just dehumanize them completely. It doesn't matter if they've got a life or that they have a bonsai tree or that they work hard. None of that matters. It's just get that person. And I think that the police perhaps possibly came under a huge amount of pressure, and they were under pressure. And I understand that. And,
This far right thing is so interesting, isn't it? Because that's what Keir Starmer came out and said everybody in the rights was just far right, just dehumanised a whole group of people. Some of them would absolutely have been probably quite proud of being called far right, but a lot of them just probably wouldn't even know what that meant if you told them they're far right.
And I don't know what far right even means anymore. And if you look at Maoist China and their cultural revolution, and you have a look at how words and narrative was changed, then the way to undermine democracy, the way to completely destroy free speech is to change the meaning of words. And that's what is happening. And it is incredibly authoritarian. It is incredibly wrong. The CPS put out a poster and said 1,000 criminals. Well, there weren't criminals, were there? I'm not a criminal. I wasn't charged. Hundreds and hundreds of people were not charged. But according to the CPS, every single person who was arrested was a criminal. That's wrong. The police, the press, who called me a criminal, all of those things, just rode a cart and horse through our basic democratic principle of innocent until proven guilty, a presumption of innocence. Now, if they can get away with it, then why shouldn't the people on the internet be able to get away with it? There's two rules here. The rules for the people that are on the right side, they can say things because it could be their truth. How often have you heard that? Oh, well, that was my truth, right? That's allowed. But if you fall outside of the new definition of the words, or you dare to challenge it, then you're the bad person. And it's that dehumanization that is a huge problem. And I know I'm talking a lot, but to call people living in those towns far-right folks, when these people are live in some of the most deprived areas in this country, and I'm not only talking about money, I'm talking about opportunity, I'm talking about education, I'm talking about any possible way out. The whole big thing now is work from home. Well, hold on a minute. How do you become socially mobile? And how do you advance yourself if you're no longer leaving your home? So those people in those towns have no way of getting out. No one's going to level them up, and no way of getting out.
No. And that was the sort of social unfairness and that social injustice is what you were speaking to largely. Even in the tweet that caused all of this furore and this life-changing experience you've been through, that theme essentially of sort of social justice was still very much in that. You then
Massively.
get Bernie. I think I eventually could talk to you a couple of days after you came out, because I couldn't talk to you straight away because I knew that I needed to be strong for you, and I couldn't be because I thought as soon as I talked to you, I'm going to start blubbing. We had no idea what was going to happen. We thought when we spoke, we were just dealing with a bit of a PR issue that we needed to probably just manage a little bit with understanding the media. And then you ended up getting arrested. My heart fell through the floor when I heard you'd been arrested, and it had a massive impact on so many public voices which are counter-narrative and are trying to shine a light on what we see as these fundamental freedom issues, whether that is surveillance, the creeping surveillance society, whether it is being tracked by our phones all the time and an app is a solution to everything and don't worry about humanity. We're united by all of these sorts of issues. When I did eventually talk to you, it was obvious that you were still really distressed. And you were really in a bad place for a couple of weeks. You didn't really leave the house at all, did you? And then you found reporters in your garden.
A lot of reporters. That's happened quite often, certainly before the arrest and after the arrest. One very, very well-known, very large organisation has been in my garden looking through my windows on 2 separate occasions, just making themselves at home with a cameraman. No, I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't do anything. I really was a very broken individual, and that whole experience, time is a healer. You do begin to feel better, and you can have some rational thoughts over things. And I think the first time I spoke to you was very, very bad. And I really was speaking to maybe 3 or 4 people maximum during that whole period. But the second time I spoke to you, you shouted at me and you said, right, enough of this now. Put your big girl pants on and stop being such a fanny. And I was cross with you. And then I thought, she's absolutely right. You can't lose more than you've lost. So if you're at the bottom, the only way is back up. And I've done that all of my working life. If you're at the bottom, just start again and work your way back up. So over the past couple of weeks, certainly after I'd spoken to you, we were still some way off the dropping of the charges. They extended the bail. And again, there was no need to do that. They'd had my devices. Like not an undercover spy or anything. There really isn't much to find, and there are a huge amount of pictures of bonsai trees and the dog. I hope they like those. There was no reason to extend it, except perhaps it was better to let it all calm down. Because don't forget, the police did give a massive announcement when they arrested me. Absolutely nothing when they gave me an NFA. And they only spoke yesterday because I did. And when they did do that on the 5th, the evening of the 5th, it took a few days for relief to settle in. And then I was given very good advice, very, very good advice by a number of people, including you. And including my very, very good friend, Dan, who's a good friend of yours too, who just said, you need to take your time. Don't do this now. And so I waited. And I did 400 versions of the video.
That's the video that you put out on social media, because you were trying so hard to articulate, weren't you, what you've been through in a way, in your voice, because it was your voice effectively that got this mess started in the first place. You then took your voice away very quickly under your own volition. Then you have your voice taken away from you again. And it's so important then when you come out again that you get to talk about it in your own words. And what a complicated statement to make. And you did a couple of videos, and one you sent to me and I went, no, it's absolutely rubbish. I need to do it again.
Yeah, you did. And it is really hard. For me, it's really hard to do a video because I've never really been, I've never had enough practice at it. Like you say, I turned down everybody's request to do anything. So I've got no practice. I don't even know how you do it. And so, yeah, there were many edits.
That video that you eventually did put out on X, I don't know whether you know how many views it's got so far. I think it's getting to over 1 million. I think now within 24 hours, it's over 1 million views.
Yeah.
1 million people. 1 million people, Bernie, are sufficiently interested in your story and who you are and what you represent that they've taken the time to watch 6 or 7 minute video on X in your own words. That is over 1 million people, and that has only been up for 24 hours, who feel this sense that we must be able to speak, to post, without fear of retribution and a knock at the door. Let me just ask you this, because I am so interested, and I've wrangled with this. To what extent were you a deliberate scalp? And when I say that, I mean, at first, when you did get arrested and I got the message to say Bernie's been arrested, I just thought, of course she has. Of course she has. If you were going to go for anyone, under this regime that I feel that we've got in the country at the moment, you would have been the person to go for, because you're not a sufficiently famous household name. If they'd started arresting other people who'd posted things, if they could start arresting journalists, then we are living in the Soviet Union and we are in North Korea. They can't quite do that yet. But you were the perfect scalp, which was very, very well known to the online community to cause enough of us to zip it, but not so well known that the mass public who watched Coronation Street on a Wednesday night would have been shocked and gone, oh my God, you're never going to guess who's been arrested for talking. Was that, do you think, just a happy coincidence? Because when I say that, it sounds like there's a man in Whitehall stroking a white cat and waiting for Bernie Spofforth to say something so that they can descend. And I know it sounds a bit ludicrous, but was it just a happy accident that it was you? Because you did silence a lot of dissenting voices. Your arrest made people tone it down.
I think that I was deliberately targeted online. That was definitely a coordinated, well, we don't like her anyway. And then people who genuinely did think I meant it like that. And so I think that was a big push. I think by the time the police were involved, I'm not sure that anyone in government knew about that, but they certainly did afterwards. And I think they probably had a celebratory glass of wine because I was a good one to take down. Oh, brilliant. That's a good one to take down. I do think
that's
that.
probably it.
And you know what? It's hard for me it's difficult to be proportionate about it when you're sat in my shoes, because no, I don't think everybody was out to get me. And yes, of course, people who don't know me and don't follow me probably did think that I'd made something up. So I understand that. But once I told social media, look, this is the evidence I found, once the police knew about the evidence I found, that should have been it. And they could have done it. They could have done it in a voluntary interview. They could have. They didn't need to keep me for 36 hours like that and tell me I was going to be remanded. And that was wrong. That was fundamentally wrong. But fortunately,
We've had a lovely long chat, and it's never long enough. And it's a shame we haven't had 2 bottles of wine and a 3-course meal while we've done it. But I just think it's so important, Bernie, to share your story, and I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for everything you've ever done and everything you've ever said throughout the last 4 years. Will you carry on holding power to account in the way that you do, as effectively I would describe as a citizen journalist, as an independent journalist? You may not like that definition, but I do very much see you in that way. Let's face it, you've done more due diligence than most journalists do these days. Will you carry on? Will you carry on, or are you scared to do so?
No, I'm not scared to do so. I'm not scared to do so. And sometimes life happens to you and your path changes, and you can either lie down and not get up again, or you can choose a new path. And as I always say, there's opportunity in all things. And I think I am more likely to be even more vocal now, because the worst that could ever happen to me has happened.
Well, that is going to be music to a lot of people's ears who follow you, and it's certainly music to mine. And you're amazing. You're brilliant, Bernie Spofforth. And you know...
I'm not, and I'm not very brave, but it happened. And when bad things happen, you have to just get on with it.
And like I said to you that day, you put your big girl pants on, and you find your inner strength, and you go out there, because when the chips are down, you just need to somehow find that inner resilience, don't you, and get through it. And
yeah, you do.
You're amazing. I love you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking to GB News Originals. Thanks, Bernie.
Thank you.